The chandeliers of Harrington Hall burned like captive constellations above a sea of silk and expectation, their golden light scattering across polished marble and powdered shoulders alike. Music trembled from the string quartet in a restrained waltz, elegant and disciplined, much like the society gathered beneath it. Yet beneath the fragrance of roses and warmed champagne lingered a sharper perfume, the scent of anticipation sharpened by rumor. Tonight, it was not the debutantes nor the dowagers who commanded attention, but a young woman standing too still near the farthest column. Miss Eliza Ashbourne wore dove-gray silk chosen for modesty rather than spectacle, its simple lines refusing to compete with the jeweled plumage around her. Her gloves bore faint evidence of mending, though her posture betrayed neither embarrassment nor apology. She had learned, long before this evening, that dignity was not granted by fortune but forged in silence. Her father's recent financial decline had stripped their carriage, their country servants, and much of their influence, but it had not stripped Eliza of composure. If anything, hardship had refined it. Across the ballroom stood the man whose name had fluttered through drawing rooms all week, Mr. Nathaniel Harrowmont. Wealth clung to him not in ostentation but in quiet authority, the tailored cut of his coat, the measured turn of his head, the way conversations paused when he shifted his weight. As heir to an industrial empire newly risen from smoke and iron, he possessed both money and modern ambition, a combination that unsettled old families and fascinated their daughters. His dark eyes, observant and calculating, lingered upon Eliza with a scrutiny that was neither tender nor indifferent. Whispers had declared that he favored her, that he admired her restraint, that a formal offer might soon follow. Hope, once released into society, travels faster than truth. Eliza felt the glances like a draft against her skin. She knew precisely what was expected of her this evening, gratitude softened by modest surprise. She had not encouraged the rumors, yet neither had she denied them. To deny hope too early would have been to insult Providence, to assume it would have been vanity. So she stood poised between both, hands folded lightly at her waist. Nathaniel began to cross the ballroom toward her. The music dimmed at the edges of her hearing as guests angled subtly closer. Conversations thinned. A few fans lifted in anticipation. His approach carried the calm assurance of a man accustomed to outcomes bending beneath his will. He bowed with impeccable precision. "Miss Ashbourne. Mr. Harrowmont." Her voice remained even, though her pulse betrayed her with a treacherous quickening. There was no tremor in him. No visible struggle. Only contemplation. "I fear," he began, loud enough that those nearest might hear without seeming to eavesdrop, "that I must correct certain assumptions." The air shifted. A silence, fine as glass, stretched between them. "I would not have it believed," he continued, his tone polished but unyielding, "that my attentions have signified intentions beyond acquaintance. I have the highest respect for you, Miss Ashbourne, but respect is not a promise." The words fell softly, yet their impact rippled outward like a stone cast into still water. A woman nearby exhaled in sympathetic astonishment. A gentleman coughed to mask surprise. The string quartet faltered for half a breath before recovering. Eliza felt the humiliation rise like heat beneath her collar, but she did not lower her gaze. She had prepared for joy, she had not prepared for correction. Yet she refused to grant the room the spectacle of injury. "I thank you for your clarity, sir," she replied, her chin lifting by a degree so slight only the most attentive observer would notice. "It is always preferable to conjecture." Nathaniel's eyes flickered, just briefly, with something unreadable. Regret? Calculation? Triumph? It passed too swiftly to name. The crowd began its subtle retreat, gossip already fermenting behind polite smiles. Eliza inclined her head once more, then turned with deliberate grace toward the terrace doors. Each step was a negotiation between pride and gravity. She would not rush. She would not flee. Outside, the night had broken into rain. The cool air struck her cheeks, mercifully disguising the warmth gathering there. The terrace lanterns flickered against stone balustrades slick with water, and beyond them the gardens dissolved into darkness. She welcomed the storm's indifference. Rain did not whisper. Rain did not speculate. Inside, laughter resumed, quieter, sharper. She pressed her gloved fingers against the cold railing and allowed herself one measured breath. Not a sob. Not a collapse. Only the steadying inhale of a woman who understands that public disgrace must be endured before it can be survived. Behind the glass doors, Nathaniel had not moved. He watched her silhouette against the rain-streaked light, watched the way she held herself upright though alone. Something within him shifted, not satisfaction, not entirely. He had expected tears, perhaps a plea, some visible proof that her affections ran deeper than courtesy. Instead, she had offered composure. It unsettled him more than hysteria would have. He told himself this restraint confirmed his suspicion. A woman truly in love would not surrender so easily. Devotion in his mind required display. Yet as she stepped down into the rain without waiting for a servant or carriage, he felt a flicker of uncertainty disturb his certainty. Eliza did not look back. The storm gathered around her, erasing the warmth of chandeliers and violin strings, and with each step away from Harrington Hall she shed not merely an expectation, but a belief. She had admired Nathaniel's intelligence, his discipline, even his guarded nature. She had thought it strength. Now she understood it differently. A fortress constructed against vulnerability, even at the expense of another's dignity. Inside, Nathaniel finally exhaled. He had corrected the narrative. He had preserved control. Society would know that he had not been ensnared by a fading family's hopeful daughter. Order restored. And yet, as thunder rolled across the city and the terrace doors closed between them, a single thought lingered with uncomfortable persistence. He had wanted to test her love. He had not considered that love, once questioned before witnesses, might quietly withdraw beyond his reach. Morning arrived pale and unforgiving, as though London itself had chosen discretion after the previous night's spectacle. Eliza Ashbourne sat by the narrow window of her family's drawing room, the light tracing the calm architecture of her face. If humiliation had carved at her pride, it had done so inwardly. Outwardly she remained composed, her movements deliberate, her voice unaltered as she directed the household maid. The world had witnessed her correction, and now it waited to see whether she would diminish beneath it. By noon the waiting transformed into gossip. A carriage slowed before the Ashbourne residence, its lacquered panels reflecting the modest brick facade like an ironic mirror. The footman descended with a velvet case cradled in gloved hands. No card accompanied it. No seal betrayed its sender. The maid carried it inside as though it were fragile enough to shatter, and Eliza accepted it with neither eagerness nor refusal. When she opened the lid, a locket gleamed within, antique gold warmed by craftsmanship older than scandal. Her initials were engraved upon its surface in delicate script, unmistakable and intimate. It was a gift chosen with care rather than impulse. She closed the lid slowly. The absence of a name spoke louder than ink. Nathaniel Harrowmont had not publicly defended her. Instead, he had privately marked her. It was not apology. It was not explanation. It was something more ambiguous, and therefore more dangerous. By evening, society had improved upon the story. It was whispered that she had entreated him for reconciliation, that the locket had been a consolation prize bestowed upon a woman unwilling to relinquish ambition, that Miss Ashbourne's dignity had dissolved the moment the ballroom doors had closed. Eliza heard the murmurs when she ventured into Bond Street to deliver linens to a charitable school she quietly supported. The glances were no longer curious but evaluative, as though she had entered a competition and lost. She felt the sting, yet she did not quicken her pace. Her humiliation would not be rewarded with retreat. Inside the small schoolroom, children clustered around her skirts with unfeigned affection. Their fingers tugged at her gloves. Their laughter dissolved the residue of chandeliers and whispers. Here no one asked about velvet boxes or broken expectations. Here value was measured in patience and kindness. She removed the locket from her reticule and regarded it once more. It caught the sunlight from the narrow windows, brilliant and unrepentant. Without flourish she handed it to the headmistress. "Please sell this," she said quietly. "Use the proceeds for coal and copybooks. Do not disclose the donor." The headmistress hesitated. "Miss Ashbourne, this appears costly." "It is," Eliza replied. "Let it purchase something useful." The act was neither theatrical nor defiant. It was precise. If Nathaniel intended the gift as a tether, she would convert it into freedom. Yet Nathaniel did not remain ignorant long. That afternoon, his associate mentioned in passing that a local school had received an unexpected benefaction in his name. Nathaniel's brows knit with restrained confusion. He had given no such instruction. When the locket was described, recognition struck him with uncomfortable clarity. He had sent it not as cruelty but as calibration. He wished to observe her response, to see whether gratitude would soften her reserve, whether she would approach him privately in thanks or supplication. Instead, she had transformed his token into charity, stripping it of intimacy and attaching his name to benevolence he had not offered. He found himself unsettled, though he masked it with indifference. That evening at a gathering hosted by a mutual acquaintance, he escorted Miss Clara Whitmore, a young woman whose fortune was both considerable and loudly admired. The gesture was deliberate. If Eliza possessed pride, he would test its endurance. If her composure was genuine, it would survive comparison. When he entered the room with Clara upon his arm, conversation paused with appreciative curiosity. Clara laughed brightly at his murmured comment, a sound calculated to carry. Nathaniel's gaze drifted instinctively across the crowd, and found Eliza. She stood near a mantelpiece adorned with early roses, her gown a subdued blue that refused rivalry. Her expression did not fracture when she observed his companion. Instead, she inclined her head in courteous acknowledgment. He excused himself from Clara with polished brevity and approached. "Miss Ashbourne," he said evenly, "I trust you are well." "As well as the weather permits, sir," she replied. "It has been most changeable." His eyes narrowed faintly. "I understand you received a parcel." "I did." "And you found it agreeable?" Her gaze met his without tremor. "It proved useful." The simplicity of her answer unsettled him more than reproach would have. "You did not think it necessary to respond." "To what purpose?" she asked gently. "Gratitude requires clarity." A faint color rose along his collar. "You mistake my intentions." "Do I?" she replied almost kindly. "Then enlighten me." For a moment the surrounding murmur receded. He had expected emotion, hurt, longing, perhaps even reproach. Instead she offered reason. It disarmed him. "I merely wished," he began carefully, "to ensure that our previous conversation had not been misunderstood." "On the contrary," she said, "it was understood perfectly." Her composure no longer appeared fragile, it appeared formidable. Across the room Clara Whitmore watched with speculative interest, and nearby guests leaned subtly closer. Nathaniel became acutely aware that he had initiated a contest whose rules he did not entirely command. "You seem unaffected," he observed. She considered him for a measured breath. "I assure you, Mr. Harrowmont, I am affected precisely as I ought to be." He searched her face for evidence of concealed desperation and found none. What he found instead was distance, a withdrawal not of civility but of trust. As she turned to greet another acquaintance, leaving him momentarily unattended, Nathaniel experienced a sensation unfamiliar and unwelcome: uncertainty. He had sought proof of devotion. He had anticipated resistance, perhaps pursuit. What confronted him instead was dignity unyielding to spectacle. And as Clara's laughter resumed behind him and society resumed its appraisal, he understood with reluctant clarity that the test he had devised was no longer measuring her heart. It was beginning to expose his own. The invitation arrived beneath a sky the color of tarnished silver, sealed with the crest of Lord Pembroke's countryside estate and bearing no hint of conspiracy. A small gathering had been arranged, respectable, carefully curated, impossible to decline without remark. Eliza accepted with measured calm, aware that retreat from society would be interpreted as defeat. If Nathaniel Harrowmont intended further spectacle, she would meet it standing. The estate rose from rolling hills like an old memory, stone softened by ivy, tall windows reflecting restless clouds. By late afternoon, carriages lined the gravel drive, their wheels whispering over damp earth. Conversation flowed easily in drawing rooms perfumed with cedar and firelight. Yet beneath the polished civility lingered the same undercurrent that had followed them for weeks, curiosity sharpened by anticipation. Nathaniel arrived last. He entered with composed deliberation, rain clinging to the shoulders of his coat, dark hair slightly disordered by wind. His presence altered the atmosphere not by force but by gravity. Guests adjusted unconsciously as though orbiting a silent center. Eliza felt the shift before she saw him. Their eyes met across the length of the gallery, and in that suspended second the murmur of conversation thinned. There was no companion upon his arm tonight. No Clara Whitmore. No calculated display. Only the faint strain around his mouth that suggested sleep had not come easily. The first roll of thunder sounded just as Lord Pembroke announced that a storm was approaching from the west. Rain struck the tall windows with sudden insistence, drumming against the glass in restless cadence. The servants moved discreetly to secure shutters, but the storm advanced too quickly. Guests were advised to remain overnight rather than brave the treacherous roads. The announcement was received with polite acquiescence. Fate, it seemed, had chosen proximity. Eliza withdrew to a smaller sitting room overlooking the gardens, seeking momentary quiet from observation. Firelight trembled against the walls, casting amber shadows that softened the severity of carved oak. She removed her gloves and extended her hands toward the hearth, steadying herself against an agitation she refused to name. The door opened without ceremony. Nathaniel stepped inside and closed it gently behind him. For a heartbeat neither spoke. Rain lashed the panes. Thunder rolled low and persistent, as though echoing an unvoiced argument. "I did not expect you to attend," he began, his tone stripped of its usual polish. "Nor did I expect to be tested in a ballroom," she replied evenly. He absorbed the words without flinching. "You believe that was my intention." "I do not believe," she said quietly. "I observed." The fire cracked between them, scattering sparks that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. Nathaniel removed his gloves slowly, as though divesting himself of armor. "I sought assurance," he admitted. "A man in my position must guard against artifice. Affection too readily declared is seldom sincere." "And affection publicly withdrawn?" she asked. "Is that the measure of prudence?" A muscle tightened along his jaw. "I required evidence." She regarded him with a composure more piercing than accusation. "Of what, sir? That I would endure humiliation for the promise of your fortune?" He stepped closer, compelled by something beyond pride. "That you cared for me beyond convenience." The words hung between them, fragile and flawed. Eliza's breath trembled once before steadying. "I did care for you," she said, each syllable deliberate. "I admired your discipline. I respected your ambition. I believed your restraint signified depth. And now—" His voice softened, no longer commanding but uncertain. "Now I understand that restraint may also conceal fear." The accusation was gentle, which rendered it inescapable. He turned away briefly, gaze fixed upon the rain-streaked glass. "You mistake caution for cowardice." "Do I?" she replied. "You feared I loved your wealth. Yet you ensured the entire city would question my integrity rather than risk questioning your own judgment." Thunder fractured the sky above them, rattling the windows in protest. Nathaniel faced her again, and for the first time since the ballroom, his certainty faltered visibly. "You did not weep," he said almost to himself. "You did not protest. You did not approach me after." "Would that have satisfied you?" she asked. "I expected resistance." "Resistance is not devotion," she answered. "Nor is endurance proof of love." Silence pressed heavily upon the room. From within her reticule she withdrew a small object wrapped in linen. She unfolded it carefully and revealed the antique locket, reclaimed from the school after she had replaced its value with her own savings. The metal caught the firelight, luminous and unrepentant. "I did not sell it," she said. "I ensured the children lacked nothing and I redeemed your gift with my own means. I would not have your charity mistaken for mine." Nathaniel stared at the locket as though it were evidence in a trial he had not realized he was conducting. "You return it?" he asked. "I release it," she corrected softly. "I will not wear a token that feels like a wager." The distinction struck him with unexpected force. He stepped forward, closing the distance until only the faintest space separated them. The air between them carried the scent of rain and smoke, intimate and unguarded. "You would abandon me so readily?" he murmured. Her gaze lifted to meet his, luminous in the firelight. "No, Mr. Harrowmont. I abandon only the illusion of you." The words settled with devastating clarity. For the first time, Nathaniel reached for her not in calculation but in impulse, his fingers brushing her wrist as though to anchor something already slipping beyond his grasp. She did not recoil, she simply withdrew with deliberate calm. "You wish to test my love," she said, her voice no louder than the rain. "You have succeeded." "And what have I proven?" he asked, the question stripped of arrogance. "That love cannot survive where it must continually justify itself." The storm raged without mercy, yet within the small room the greater tempest had already broken. Eliza placed the locket upon the table between them, a quiet boundary drawn in gold. "Good evening, sir." She moved toward the door, her steps steady though her heart trembled with unspent feeling. Nathaniel did not attempt to bar her path. He stood motionless, watching as she left the warmth of the fire for the dim corridor beyond. When the door closed, the sound was gentle. Yet in the echo of that softness, Nathaniel understood with sudden, piercing clarity that he had not merely tested her devotion. He had placed his own within reach of judgment, and she had found it wanting. The weeks following the storm unfolded with a deceptive quiet, as though society itself held its breath in anticipation of the next misstep. Eliza Ashbourne did not retreat into obscurity, yet she no longer lingered where admiration might mistake her composure for invitation. She attended only those engagements tied to charity or obligation, her presence calm, her conversation measured. If whispers trailed her still, they found no purchase. She offered neither resentment nor reconciliation. Nathaniel Harrowmont discovered that absence possessed a sharper edge than humiliation. He had expected anger, perhaps a dramatic withdrawal that would invite pursuit. Instead, Eliza conducted herself with serene independence, and the quiet dignity of it unsettled him more profoundly than any accusation. Her restraint no longer appeared a puzzle to solve but a mirror reflecting his own miscalculation. At a philanthropic exhibition hosted in the Grand Assembly Rooms of Kensington, their paths converged once more. The hall shimmered with crystal sconces and polished brass, the air perfumed by lilies arranged in towering vases. Paintings lined the walls, landscapes and portraits offered for auction to benefit hospitals and orphanages. The event celebrated benevolence, yet beneath its refinement pulsed the familiar appetite for spectacle. Eliza stood beside a display of children's sketches from the very school she had aided. Her gown was ivory, unadorned save for a slender ribbon at her waist. She listened attentively as a patron praised the resilience of youth, her expression thoughtful rather than indulgent. She had grown quieter but not diminished. If anything, she seemed anchored by some internal clarity. Nathaniel observed her from across the room before crossing the polished floor with deliberate resolve. He had spent restless nights revisiting every word spoken in the stormlit sitting room, each memory stripping another layer from his certainty. He no longer questioned whether she had loved him. He questioned why he had demanded proof. "Miss Ashbourne," he said, his voice low yet steady. She turned, neither startled nor expectant. "Mr. Harrowmont." Their civility was intact, yet beneath it flowed a current too charged to ignore. "I have wronged you," he began without ornament, publicly and with deliberation. A nearby gentleman glanced discreetly toward them, sensing an alteration in tone. Eliza regarded Nathaniel with calm scrutiny. "You sought assurance," she replied. "You obtained it. At the expense of your reputation," he said, "and of my own integrity." The admission cost him visibly. Pride did not relinquish its hold easily. Yet he continued, "I mistook your composure for calculation. I feared admiration born of necessity rather than regard." "And now?" she asked, echoing the question once posed in firelight. "Now I perceive that the only calculation was mine." Her gaze softened almost imperceptibly, though caution remained. Perception arrives conveniently when loss becomes possible. The word struck true. Around them, conversation resumed with greater interest, guests drawn by the undercurrent of confession. Nathaniel became aware that the setting mirrored the ballroom where he had first wounded her. He had corrected a narrative before witnesses. Now he must amend it the same way. He stepped slightly aside from her, raising his voice just enough to carry without descending into spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, commanding attention with the authority he once wielded carelessly, "I request your indulgence." The murmur stilled. "I have allowed a misunderstanding to persist," he continued. "Weeks ago, I publicly distanced myself from Miss Ashbourne under the pretense of prudence. In truth, I acted from doubt unworthy of her character." A ripple of astonishment traveled through the hall. "I sought to test her constancy," he said, his voice unwavering now. "Instead, I revealed my own deficiency of trust. If any disparagement has followed her name, it is mine to bear." Silence thickened, not hostile but electric. Eliza felt every eye upon her, yet this time the scrutiny did not scorch. Nathaniel's confession did not restore what had been broken, but it shifted the burden from her shoulders to his own. He had surrendered the protection of pride before the same society he once enlisted. He turned back to her, lowering his tone. "I do not request forgiveness," he said. "Only the opportunity to prove that I have learned from my folly." Her heart responded before her reason could restrain it, but she kept her expression composed. "Proof," she murmured, "is a word with unfortunate history between us." "I know," he replied. "Then allow me to offer not proof but patience." The humility in his posture, shoulders squared yet unguarded, spoke more eloquently than the speech that preceded it. Across the room, Clara Whitmore watched with narrowed eyes, recognizing the shift in allegiance not as romantic triumph but as public recalibration. Society, ever eager for reversal, adjusted accordingly. Where once there had been whispers against Eliza, there were now murmurs questioning Nathaniel's earlier conduct. Eliza drew a steady breath. "You have restored my reputation," she said quietly. "For that I thank you." "But not my place beside you," he replied, perceiving the boundary. She did not deny it. Trust, once fractured, does not mend at the speed of declaration. Yet something within her, a quiet ember she had attempted to extinguish, responded to the sincerity in his voice. He had relinquished control in the very arena where he once exercised it. "I cannot promise what I do not yet feel," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "I would not insult you by asking it," he answered. The orchestra resumed, tentative at first, then swelling into confident melody. The hall exhaled. Conversation flowed once more but altered. The narrative had shifted. Nathaniel extended his hand, not as a claim but as invitation. "May I escort you through the gallery?" She regarded his outstretched hand, aware that acceptance would not signify surrender, only willingness to continue the conversation he had once silenced. Slowly she placed her gloved fingers within his. The contact was restrained, yet charged with the weight of everything unsaid. As they walked together beneath the glow of crystal light, observers noted the transformation without fully understanding it. This was no triumph secured by conquest, nor reconciliation purchased by grand gesture. It was the fragile beginning of something more deliberate. Yet even as hope stirred cautiously between them, Eliza knew that confession alone could not resurrect faith. Nathaniel had relinquished pride before witnesses, now he must relinquish fear in private. And as they paused before a landscape washed in painted sunset, their reflections faintly visible in the glass, she wondered whether the man beside her sought redemption from scandal, or from himself. Dusk descended upon the Ashbourne garden with deliberate tenderness, as though the sky itself hesitated to intrude upon what remained unresolved between them. The roses, heavy with late summer bloom, bowed beneath their own fragrance. Gravel paths glimmered faintly beneath lantern light, and the air carried the softened hush that follows public spectacle. Here, removed from chandeliers and scrutiny, only truth could endure. Eliza stood beside the stone fountain at the garden's center, its water whispering against marble in steady rhythm. She had chosen this meeting not from sentiment but from necessity. If Nathaniel Harrowmont sought redemption, it would not be negotiated beneath the gaze of admirers. It would be confronted where dignity first learned its cost, at home. He entered through the iron gate without escort, hat in hand, posture neither proud nor diminished. The distance between them felt larger than the narrow path that separated their positions. For weeks he had practiced speeches in solitude, yet now language seemed insufficient against the quiet clarity in her expression. "I thank you for receiving me," he began, his voice unadorned. "You asked for candor," she replied. "Candor requires privacy." The fountain continued its gentle cadence, indifferent yet persistent. Nathaniel studied her features, the calm line of her mouth, the strength that had once appeared softness. "When I addressed the assembly," he said, "I spoke of error. I did not speak of fear." Her gaze sharpened. "Fear is rarely admitted in men accustomed to command." "I feared loving more than being loved," he confessed. "I feared surrendering certainty. I believed that by testing you, I preserved myself." "And instead," she prompted quietly, "instead, I discovered that I had already surrendered, only without the courage to acknowledge it." The admission did not tremble, it settled. Eliza absorbed his words without immediate response. She had once admired his composure, now she measured its sincerity. "You sought proof of my devotion," she said. "What proof do you offer of yours?" He stepped closer, though not so near as to presume familiarity. "None," he answered. "Proof implies transaction. I offer constancy without spectacle, patience without condition. I offer to stand beside you without demanding demonstration." The distinction mattered. "You wounded not my pride," she continued, "but my trust. When you withdrew before witnesses, you taught me that affection may be rescinded to protect reputation." "And I was wrong," he said, not defensively but with acceptance. "Reputation is restored by confession. Trust is restored by conduct. I cannot ask you to forget the ballroom. I can only ensure I never again place you there as subject of judgment." The garden darkened incrementally as evening deepened. Lantern light traced the edges of their forms, illuminating distance and possibility alike. Eliza felt the old ache stir within her, not humiliation but longing. She had loved him once without calculation. She had believed his restraint signified depth rather than doubt. To love him again would require vulnerability she had only just reclaimed. "You speak of patience," she said. "But patience demands endurance. Would you endure uncertainty?" "If it is yours," he replied, gladly. The answer was immediate. She turned slightly toward the fountain, listening to water break against stone. "When you humiliated me," she said, "I resolved never to stand where my worth depended upon another's suspicion. It shall not, he vowed. Vows, she murmured, are easily spoken in gardens. He met her observation without protest. Then judge me by time. A silence followed, not hostile but contemplative. The sky dimmed to indigo, and a single star pierced the horizon like fragile promise. Eliza faced him fully at last. "Do you love me?" she asked, the simplicity of the question rendering it formidable. Nathaniel did not hesitate. "Yes." The word carried no flourish, only gravity. "Not because I withstood your test?" she pressed. "No. Because you refused it." Her breath faltered once, then steadied. "I love the woman who turned my gift into sustenance for children," he continued. "I love the woman who met humiliation with composure. I love the woman who would rather relinquish affection than beg for it." Emotion flickered across her face, hope tempered by caution. "You believe love requires surrender," she said. "Yet surrender must be mutual." He understood the implication before she voiced it. Slowly, deliberately, Nathaniel removed the signet ring from his finger, the emblem of his family's authority, and placed it upon the stone edge of the fountain between them. "This," he said quietly, "has symbolized inheritance and command. Tonight it symbolizes relinquishment. I do not stand before you as arbiter of devotion. I stand as man asking, not testing." The gesture was neither theatrical nor impulsive. It was symbolic in a language she understood. Her heart responded with a tremor she could no longer suppress. For weeks she had guarded herself against precisely this vulnerability. Yet his confession no longer felt like performance, it felt costly. "You would risk reputation again?" she asked softly. "For you," he answered, "reputation is secondary." The gravity in his voice left no room for irony. She stepped toward him, closing the space that had once felt insurmountable. "I cannot promise that trust will bloom overnight," she said. "Nor can I promise that doubt will never revisit us." "I do not ask for perfection," he replied. "Only partnership." The words settled between them like an offering. Eliza reached toward the fountain and lifted the signet ring, weighing it briefly in her palm. She could return it and close the gate upon possibility. She could preserve dignity without risking tenderness. Or she could accept that love, imperfect yet sincere, demanded courage equal to pride. Slowly she extended her hand, not to give the ring back but to place it within his own. "I will not be tested again," she said. "You will not," he vowed. "And if ever you doubt me," she continued, "you will speak to me not about me." He inclined his head, solemn as oath. "Always." The final barrier between them dissolved not in grand proclamation but in shared understanding. Nathaniel lifted her hand to his lips, not in possession but reverence. The contact was brief, restrained, yet electric with mutual acknowledgement. In that moment, the central conflict that had once defined them shifted. No longer adversaries in a silent contest of pride, they stood as equals confronting the same uncertainty. Yet resolution did not arrive without tension. From beyond the garden wall came the distant rumble of carriage wheels. Society never sleeps entirely. Tomorrow whispers would evolve once more. Some would accuse Eliza of capitulation. Others would commend Nathaniel's repentance. Their reconciliation would not silence the world. But for the first time, its judgment no longer governed them. Nathaniel retrieved the ring and slid it back upon his finger, not as armor but as reminder. "I will spend the remainder of my life ensuring that the only test between us is time," he said. Eliza met his gaze, no longer guarded but resolute. "Then let time begin." He drew her gently into his embrace, the gesture restrained yet decisive. The fountain murmured approval, and above them the indigo sky deepened into velvet night. He had once believed love required examination to ensure its purity. Now he understood that love survives not scrutiny but trust. And as the lantern flames steadied against the dark, Nathaniel realized with profound clarity that the faith he had nearly extinguished was not hers, but his own.